August 20th, 1944. On Thursday this week, Allied forces cross the pre-war German Reich border and enter East Prussia. Less than 200 kilometers to the southwest from there, deep in the East Prussian forests, protected to the east by the Masurian lakes, German Führer Adolf Hitler cowers in his bunker at the Wolfschanze. On an hourly basis, his medical team pumps him full with a cocktail of drugs designed to keep him level-keel in balance between states of euphoric delusion and energetic fury. Increasingly paranoid, he reorganizes his army commands remotely, issues impossible-to-fulfill orders, clings to futile dreams of a last-minute turnaround of his war fortunes, and rages against the Allied successes. This week, more and more, the madness he has carried into the world is opposed by humanity. This is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus, Olsson. Last week, the resistance in occupied France increased, as did retribution on collaborators in the liberated areas. Germany kept bombing the British Isles with V-1 missiles with limited success. The Allies bombed occupied Europe and Nagasaki with limited success. The Nazis liquidated the Łódź labor camps, evacuating the Jewish inmates to be murdered at Auschwitz. And in Warsaw, the uprising led to endless death and suffering as the Soviets continued to refuse any assistance to their allies there. The war is not going well for Germany and Hitler, and you'd think that extricating his regime and country from this impossible situation would be at the top of his mind. But no. By his actions and his words, we know that at the top of Hitler's mind in August 44 is retribution, revenge, and fulfilling his genocidal legacy before it is too late. In concert with his most radical minion, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, in what looks more and more like a unified swan song, they plot to cement beyond their own existence what Himmler recently called an irreversible racial realignment of the East, through the decimation of the Slavic cultures. At the top of their agenda, though, is the murder of every last Jewish man, woman, or child they can get their hands on. This week, their confused, imaginary battle against the mythical Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy they have dreamed up reaps an actual Marxist victim, though. On the first day of the week, on Himmler's whispered advice, Hitler orders the murder of the man who arguably put him in power by taking away enough support from the center-left in the elections of 1932 to make impossible an anti-extremist social democrat liberal conservative majority coalition government. Ernst Thälmann, leader of the now dissolved German Communist Party. Hitler's opponent in the 1932 presidential election that both lost to Hindenburg, who in turn less than a year later installed Hitler as chancellor by executive order, sealing the fate of the world to end up in this war. Thälmann has been held in permanent solitary confinement for the past 11 years at Bautzen prison near the German-Slovakian border. A fortnight ago, he was taken from there to Buchenwald concentration camp. On Friday, August 18th, Thälmann is secretly executed by firing squad at the camp. His death will be publicly announced next week as caused by an Allied bombing. Which brings us to another of Hitler's revenge fantasies, defeat of the British by hitting their civilians from the air with his Vergeltungswaffen. This week, the V-1 cruise missile attacks continue, and again the British defences take out most of them before they reach their targets. Most, but not all. On Wednesday, one hits High Street of Walthamstow in East London, killing 17 and injuring 62. The same day, 9 more people are killed further south in Brockley, Deptford, southeast London, when it is hit for the 7th time. On Thursday, several missiles get through the defences. Most hit nothing of consequence, but 3 people die in one of those scattered strikes. At Rotherhithe Street in Bermondsey, Southwark, a second bomb hits true, killing 17 and injuring more than 60. And on Mosbury Road and Lavender Hill, Battersea, South London, a third kills 16 residents. The next day, a V-1 hits a railway bridge over Oak Lane in Newington, Kent, just as an express train is approaching. The locomotive and tender jump the gap, but the first 2 carriages crash onto the road. 7 passengers and a railway worker are killed. On Saturday, only very few bombs get through and no deaths are recorded. But on Sunday, 16 are killed in the areas around Twickenham Road, Feltham and Studley Road in Stockwell, London, bringing the total deaths for the week to 73. While Hitler's rockets keep coming down over England, in London, the debate for the best strategy for bombing is reignited. One faction wants to focus the bombing on German oil production and storage capacity. Another wants the transport system bombed. A third wants the industry hit. And head of RAF Bomber Command Arthur Harris wants to continue terror bombing German cities. When eventually the oil faction will come out victorious and a directive is issued that this should be the main priority, Harris notes in the margin of his copy, "Here we go around the mulberry bush again." He intends to follow the directive to the possible minimum and continue his own track. Already now in August, he's been directed to hit oil, and under some protest he does, but a larger force is sent this week to Bremen. I say larger, but nowhere near as large as the 1,000 bomber raids of the last years, because not only oil, but also bomber support of the regular military effort is up and requires planes. So, on the night between August 16th and 17th, it's 288 aircraft, 216 Lancasters, 65 Halifaxes, and 7 Mosquitoes. But in difference to last year, the Luftwaffe is now hobbled beyond recognition, and they meet a lot less opposition. Only 1 Lancaster is lost. Also, the German air defenses misread the attack and thinks it's headed for Berlin. The alarm is only sounded at the last moment in Bremen. Skies are clear and targeting is above average. Among the 1,100 tons of bombs they drop are 1,080,000 clustered incendiary devices. The combined effect is a massive fires across the already damaged inner city and many people caught above ground, rushing for shelters in the inferno of rubble and fire, collapse from smoke inhalation, exhaustion, and burns. 1,058 bodies will be recovered. Hundreds more remain missing and are probably also dead. 300 of the bodies are, however, inside a shelter that takes a direct hit. The hits that the German military are taking also translate to more resistance and partisan activity behind the front lines. I will cover the background to some of the resistance events this week and resistance in many parts of Europe in the spring and summer of 1944 in a special resistance and partisan dedicated episode next week. But here's some of the events for this week. As this week begins, the Auschwitz offensive, the third and final phase of Operation Bagration, ends in success, although in practice fighting inside and around the captured objectives will persist for many months. As it ends, the Red Army stands on the borders of Romania, and there, a forward bulwark protecting the German Reich's eastern borders looks like it may be crumbling. On Thursday, Ion Antonescu, Conducător of Romania, signs an armistice with the anti-German opposition in Romania. The next day, the Allies land in southern France and begin Operation Dragoon. In Italy, the Allied forces have now liberated the southern two-thirds of the country. By this week, they are building up towards an attack on the German-Italian fascist defenses along the Gothic line that bisects the Italian peninsula from La Spezia on the Ligurian Sea in the west to Pesaro on the Adriatic in the east. In the remaining German-occupied Italian territories, the coalition of politically left, center, and conservative partisan movements continue the guerrilla war they began this spring. The Nazi-fascist forces find it almost impossible to fight the partisans head-on effectively, and instead they go after the civilian population while trying to flush out partisan fighters one by one. For example, in the Susa Valley near Turin, a hotbed of partisan activity, German Wehrmacht soldiers and Italian fascist militiamen go from village to village, searching houses, arresting suspected partisans, often shooting them in summary executions. Most of the time they steal any food, sellable objects, and farm animals they can take with them before burning down houses ostensibly suspected of housing partisans. A prominent Italian partisan leader who we have met before, Aragobetti Marchesini, lives in one of the villages with her husband Ettore and teenage son Paolo. The whole family are active partisan operatives. Last week, their village was raided. Ettore and Paolo slipped away before the Nazi fascist squads arrived, and Ada managed to pull wool over the eyes of the 2 German soldiers searching their house. It was a close call, though. They saw a big bundle of cash laying visible in her open purse, pulled out a collection of surplus military fatigues and blouses in her and Ettore's wardrobes, with a Sten gun magazine in one of the pockets that just missed them, and found her diary of partisan life written in deliberately jumbled English. She found plausible explanations for all of that the soldiers believed, or at least chose to believe, and the Gobetti Marchesini house was spared. Others were not so lucky. From a first approximate calculation, it seems that around 70 houses were burned without being pre-selected, indiscriminately. That there were no spies in the town, as I had upheld, was demonstrated by the fact that not one house of a partisan had been touched. First, they burned the uninhabited houses that had been abandoned by the evacuees after having emptied them of their contents, then those of the townspeople, here and there capriciously by chance. They had not found anything anywhere to justify the reprisal, which evidently had the simple goal of pillage and terrorism. Terror that does little to abate the partisan efforts. In France, the situation is much the same. Both in the south and the north, ahead of the advancing regular armies, the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, the FFI, continue taking the battle to the occupier, who again responds with atrocities. The railway workers' wild strike in Paris has already expanded to other corporations and institutions. Last Sunday, most gendarmes, the order police, joined, and 2 days later, on August 15th, the clandestine CGT union called for a general strike. That same day, the many Parisian regular policemen joined the strike. The French Gestapo and a large section of the French police loyal to the Vichy regime do not, though. As the rising in Paris grows likelier and likelier, they and their German masters start to crack down hard on the resistance, while some FFI cells start preliminary operations. On the walls of French houses all over the country, posters are still plastered with French Vichy regime President Philippe Pétain's last call, put up shortly after D-Day, that reads, "The circumstances of the battle may lead the German army to make special arrangements in the combat zones. Accept this need. It is an urgent recommendation that I make to you in the interest of your own safety." In Paris, these special arrangements are mass executions. Already now, thousands of partisan anti-Nazi, anti-Vichy militants have been murdered and dumped in mass graves across the city and its suburbs in places like Champ-de-Mars, Jardin de Luxembourg, Fort de Vincennes, Fort de Romainville, Ivry-sur-Seine, Les Pavillons-sous-Bois, Créteil, Pierrefitte, Villemomble, Gagny-le-Rincy, Oisserie, Autun-le-Plaine, Chelles-de-Mont, Arbonne, Châtenay-Malabry, Chatou, and so on. While these mass murders continue, surgical attacks and ambushes by the FFI on the German occupiers escalate. Now, the train strike has more or less isolated the capital, but newly appointed German governor of occupied Paris, General Dietrich von Koltitz, has managed to get some rails directing Germany back into operation and scrambled up German engineers to operate any locomotives they can get to work. His men plead with him to use that thin lifeline to evacuate. Instead, Koltitz orders the train to be used to evacuate more than 3,000 imprisoned resistance members to Compiègne, the site east of Paris where the armistice of 1918 and the French capitulation of 1940 were signed. Fleeing alongside the deportees is SS Administrator of Deportations Adolf Eichmann's right-hand man and deputy, SS Hauptsturmführer Alois Brunner, commandant of the Drancy transit camp. He has just crowned his personal achievement to deport 24,000 Jewish people from France to the gas chambers by rounding up 1,327 Jewish children in only 4 days last month to then send them to Auschwitz to be murdered. His train is the last transport to leave Drancy. At the rear of the train, 51 Jewish men and women are held in a cattle car. Brunner hopes to use them as hostages and negotiating chips if anyone tries to stop his flight. On August 17, Brunner's train leaves Compiègne for Germany, followed by one train with 1,251 resistance fighters headed for Buchenwald concentration camp and one with 2,080 headed for Ravensbrück. The next day, the Allies overrun the area around Drancy, and the Red Cross enters the camp to find 500 survivors in appalling conditions. Brunner couldn't fit into his train to murder. 11 kilometers to the southwest, in the center of Paris, the skirmishes continue with both sides taking prisoners. The FFE makes substantial gains, capturing several official buildings. On August 19th, the FFE escalate the skirmishes into a full-fledged uprising. Koltitz sends his men out in force to quell the rising, but before the day is over, the sides are caught in what can only be described as a deadly stalemate, with a slight advantage for Koltitz's men. By now, 4,213 resistance fighters have been captured by the Germans, and around 600 Germans are being held by the resistance. On Sunday, August 20th, Swedish Consul General Raoul Nordling intercedes to mediate an armistice to save Paris and end the bloodshed. He manages to convince Koltitz and the FFE commanders of a prisoners' exchange and a ceasefire. Although many FFE fighters ignore the armistice, the worst fighting abates, and it seems the city is saved from destruction for now, as the Allies continue their cautious advance along the banks of the Seine, ready to join the FFE to liberate Paris. Many 100 kilometers to the northeast, their ally, the Red Army, are also standing on a river in front of an occupied capital in rising. But they are not ready to assist the anti-Nazi resistance. The only outside help for the Armia Krajova, the Home Army, continue to be the very limited supply drops by the RAF. But as the week begins, the Western world finally finds out what is happening in the Polish capital. Jan Nowak, the courier from Warsaw running the clandestine radio Lightning, writes, "On August 15, a happy event occurred in our group, which for a moment chased all these worrying thoughts away. In the evening, London, for the first time, confirmed radio reception of Lightning and repeated the gist of the broadcast given that morning. Incredible excitement. After a fortnight's struggle in the face of great difficulties, the technicians had their moment of glory, and the journalists, writers, and poets knew that they were not talking to themselves. From then on, all those involved in program broadcasts in the morning sat next to their sets at night to listen to their own words returning from far away." Comforting words perhaps, but not anything that will end the continued fighting and the atrocities inside the city. Even the slightest hope for assistance from the Soviets standing in Praga is dwindling. On Saturday, 14-year-old Armia Krajova fighter Julian Kulski writes in his diary, "While we were tied down in Żoliborz, fighting off individual attacks, the rest of the city had been going through veritable hell. The Russians were withdrawing from the outskirts of Warsaw and refusing to help us in any way. In fact, information reaching General Burkomorovsky's headquarters told of his officers being arrested by the Red Army as they carried out his order to bring all armed units of the Home Army into Warsaw through the Great Kamiński forest." The next day, some of those units do get through and attack the German-led Nazi coalition. That evening, Julian writes, "The orders were for the partisans to attempt to break through the German lines in order to replenish the depleted garrison forces in the old city. In spite of the courage and the dedication of the partisans, however, the attack has failed, and nearly 100 dead and wounded soldiers now lie in the field in front of the Warsaw-Gdansk railway station." And so the terror continues. By now, the number of Varsovians held in Durchgangslager 121, the transit camp outside of the city, is running into 6 figures. Numbers that are noted by the bureaucrats of genocide located a 4-hour train ride to the south with some anticipation. On August 15th, SS Sturmbannführer Wilhelm Burger, head of the administration at the Auschwitz camp complex, reports to his superior in Berlin, SS Gruppenführer Georg Lerner. The camp volume on the 1st of August 1944 was 379,167 male prisoners, 145,119 female prisoners, total 524,286. In addition, there are the following announced new additions. 1. From the Hungarian program, Jewish Action, 90,000. 2. From Litzmannstadt, that's Łódź in German. Police prison and ghetto, 60,000. 3. Poles from the Generalgouvernement, 15,000. 4. Prisoners from the Ostland, 10,000. 5. Former Polish officers, 17,000. 6. From Warsaw, Poland, 400,000. 7. Continuous additions from France, approximately 15,000 to 20,000. Total, 612,000. A large part of the prisoners are already in the process of being rolled up and will be admitted to the concentration camp in the next few days. Burger doesn't distinguish between Jews and non-Jews, but which groups they belong to will have significant impact on how they are treated on arrival. Most non-Jews will either be enslaved at Auschwitz or sent as slaves to another camp. A potentially deadly verdict, but not as deadly as what faces Jewish people. This week, around 10,000 Jews from Katowice, Trieste, Zagreb, Łódź, the district of Galicia, Hungary, and Rhodes arrive in several transports. Just under 3,000 are enslaved. An unknown number of the young and healthy are held as depot prisoners, that is, reserves for other slave camps or potentially to be used as negotiating chips with the Allies, while over 6,000 men, women, and children are murdered in the gas chambers. Dr. Josef Mengele also selects 59 male arrivals for medical experimentation, bringing the total number of prisoners being tortured by him to 82 men, an unknown number of women, and 49 pairs of twins, both male and female. The non-twins are mostly people with dwarfism in one form or another, Dr. Mengele's second obsession for his pseudo-medical experiments. At the end of this week, his boss, SS camp Dr. Edvard Wirtz, issues an assessment of his protege. He lauds his work to combat epidemics at the camp, his diligent service, conscientious and dedicated work, and the, I quote, extraordinary things he has done in the field of anthropology. Let me parse that into real actions for you. His fight against camp epidemics has largely been confined to identifying sick people, especially those inflicted with typhus, and sending them to be murdered in the gas chambers. One typhus patient in his immediate care conspicuously evaded the gas chamber and received treatment instead. Mengele himself. His diligent work has been his personal oversight over the selection process on the arrival platforms for who to kill and who to enslave. In the laboratory, he has been conscientiously dedicated to perform useless, at best pseudo-scientific, excruciatingly painful, mutilating experiments leading to a slow and awful death of his living human subjects who get no anesthesia or relief in order to document their suffering. The extraordinary things he has done for anthropology is to subject people with dwarfism to hocus-pocus treatment ideas with painful outcome, perform vivisection to observe their insides as they live and breathe, and then killing them for dissection, or to take pairs of twins, subject one of them to his awful experiments, wait for the experiment to run its course, sometimes for months, to get some result, and then killing both at the same time to create a before and after pathological report and a collection of organs and body parts that he has sent to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology in Berlin-Dahlem. Dr. Wirtz is mighty impressed and concludes his assessment with that because of this excellent achievement, he is already awarded the Order of the War Merit Cross, second class with swords. In addition to his medical knowledge, he has a special knowledge in the field of anthropology, so it appears he is suitable for every further order, even for higher tasks. According to one of the prisoners who is forced to assist Mengele in his work, this is the most dangerous type among criminals, who also has immeasurable power. He sends millions to death because, according to Nazi racial theory, these are not people, but beings of a lower genre who have a pernicious influence on humanity. It is hard to ignore the irony of that Nazi opinion, for if anything, that is what extremism has, a pernicious influence on humanity. A blight on our species carried into our societies through the acceptance of horrid, offensive opinions about other human beings. An egocentric, egotistical refusal to accept the simple principle that your individual rights end where the next person's individual rights begin, and that those rights are universal and equal. A degradation of human culture, knowledge, and humanity by affording unfounded beliefs, superstition, and political opinions the false label of truth and calling it science. Think of that the next time you hear anyone scoff at an academic education, actual science, and the principle of scientifically established truth. It's not just a misguided opinion. It is the first step on a journey that leads to the land where the Dr. Mengeles are kings. Never forget.